Let me give you an example of how this might sort of work sort of in practice, and this is, just bear with me in this. You know, I mean, one of the things that, I don't think you know this, but one of the things I do on the waterfall experience, right, is I take someone to the top of Pennyvan and we look out and we look at the horizon. And one of the things I do is I get them to actually focus on the space. And I'll call it space, for want of a better word, but you know what I'm saying? All that emptiness, the nothingness, if you like, between them at the top of the mountain and the far horizon, and even beyond that. I mean, we could go as far into space as we wanted, right? Now, we know, or just bear with me on this, we assume we know that there is nothing physical in that space, right? Now, I would call that space energy, and I think from what you said earlier, you said that you would call it consciousness as well. This is the point I'm making, you see. Because what I'm saying to people is, you can see there is all this energy in front of you. If I label it as energy, right, that energy can be turned into physical matter. That's the point, right? So, and how do you do that, right? You use your consciousness, you use your imagination.
I think that's an absolutely valid kind of exercise.
That's where I'm coming from, which is why I ask you, you know, the distinction, if you like, between energy and consciousness, because I'm thinking to myself, maybe I'm, you know...
No,
but it does work. It does work.
You know, it's a different thing, and I like that example at the top of Pennyvan, because actually when you look at you're seeing kind of the big emptiness as the kind of ocean of possibilities.
Absolutely.
So, you know, and that can, you know, from that can manifest anything that your consciousness desires, and it is so important to understand that things will manifest from where our consciousness is at.
Yeah.
So I think that's an absolutely valid thing, and in no way kind of, you know, contradicts, you know, the point that we're making.
Yeah.
That consciousness is the primal energy, and it manipulates it manipulates matter. But you know what, I'm just adding to the point that consciousness doesn't just manipulate matter; it actually generates matter. That's the only difference I'm making.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
You know,
It
doesn't contradict it. It just adds that point that ultimately what we call matter or energy ultimately isn't, in the absolute sense, distinct from consciousness, because it is generated from consciousness.
Yes.
And that's why everything ultimately ties. If there's the unified kind of theory, which is consciousness, ultimately that's where it's at.
Okay.
But that does not take away from the point that you were making very kind of wisely there, that actually most of the time it is actually better for us to think of the energy and the world around us as something as separate we have manifested. That would actually be a better way of looking at the world and utilising it for our benefit and others.
Yeah, because also going back to what I was saying earlier, if I've got my fingers like this and that space in between my fingers, are there atoms and molecules in that space between my finger and thumb there? Yeah. Are they only there when I look at them? Do you see what I'm saying? Going back to what I said earlier, does the atom as a tendency, if you like, to put it neutrally, not as a physical thing, not as a particle nor as a wave, but as a tendency to become a particle or a wave or something else, right, exist until I actually focus on it?
Well, I actually,
with my consciousness.
I mean, as much as, you know, I like the quantum physical thing that kind of shows how consciousness is primal in the in the actual manifestation of matter, something appearing as a particle, a wave, or whatever. I think that we have to be careful of making, you know, like the sound of, you know, the tree collapsing in the forest. Just because I'm not there doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'm not the only conscious being around. I'm not, you know, the world doesn't revolve around me. You know, there's a lot of other creatures who are very heavily affected by that tree falling. Not least the tree itself.
I was going to say, doesn't the tree have a consciousness?
Exactly. That reminds me of a time we were discussing architecture, and we were looking at stone structures, and one of the engineers was saying, well, you know, stone, it wants to be an arch. You know, that's its natural thing. It just wants to be an arch. And then someone said, well, we were looking at timber structures. What does the timber want to be? And someone piped up, a tree.
Yes, a tree again.
I would rather be left as a tree, thank you very much. So the tree in the forest,
Yeah.
you know, it's got its own consciousness.
Yeah.
It's very upset about having to fall down. And all the little creatures and birds and insects that live in it, you know, thinking, what's happened to our environment? So just because I'm not there viewing it doesn't mean it ceases to exist. Similarly, the atoms and molecules in my body are doing their job because they're in the care of the cells. The cells in my body are doing their job because my consciousness subconsciously is feeding them to get on with it.
But what you say does raise an interesting question, doesn't it, that goes to the very heart of this again and again about creating our reality and how we perceive reality. You know, is there reality beyond what we perceive?
Absolutely, because you know, I don't think that our breadth, you know, and extent of perception is generally that.
But if we talked about illusions earlier, if arguably at the quantum physical level everything is an illusion.
Yeah, but the rest of the world shouldn't be dependent on my illusion.
Well, no, that's not the, yeah, but that's not quite, that's
No,
not
no,
quite
I know,
the point I'm making.
I know.
You know, I mean, it's like, let me try and phrase this in such a way to make it meaningful. You know, how do we know that the stars exist in the sky?
Well, I can see a few of them, so I might think those exist.
Yes. The ones you can't see?
Well, how do I know? And
but isn't that the same with the tree falling down the forest?
No, my point is that those stars are not dependent on me knowing about them.
That doesn't matter, does it? Are they real or not? Are they
you
reality
can say,
or not?
So the question is, are they real? Personally, I believe that reality isn't dependent on my consciousness, because there are others.
So reality is dependent on universal consciousness.
Well, yeah.